Conversations on race and policing began in response to the police killing of George Floyd on May 25, 2020. In this partnership between CSU San Bernardino and the Brennan Center for Justice, we hope to engage in ongoing discussions related to the history and current context of race, policing, and criminal justice with guests from diverse academic fields and backgrounds.
Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. It's an absolute delight for us to welcome Father Gregory Boyle and hear a little bit about his work at Homeboy Industries and also his latest book, Cherished Belonging. I'm very excited to listen in on this session, and I'll first pass to Mike German for our land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Jeremy. California State University San Bernardino acknowledges that the land on which our San Bernardino facility is sited is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mahrayam, commonly referred to as Serrano people, which in the contemporary era are represented by two federally recognized Indian tribes, the Yuha Vietnam of San Manuel Nation and the Morongo Band of Mission Indians. Our histories and stories are intertwined in this space, and by sharing them in culturally appropriate ways, we honor and celebrate our Indigenous neighbors and partners. Since 1965, CSUSB's development has benefited and will continue to benefit from this land's location and resources, and we recognize this. Along with the land acknowledgement, this university affirms tribal sovereignty and our responsibility to work with these tribes to further mutual respect and gratitude for all those involved. And now I'll toss it over to Amber.
Hi, everybody. Today we have Gregory Boyle, who is an American Jesuit priest and the founder of Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles, California. This is the largest gang intervention, rehabilitation, and reentry program in the world. In 2024, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom and the United States' highest civilian honor. He's received the California Peace Prize and has been inducted into the California Hall of Fame. He received the University of Notre Dame's 2017 Laetare Medal, the oldest honor given to American Catholics. He's the acclaimed author of Tattoos on the Heart, Barking to the Choir, and The Whole Language. And we have Cherished Belonging, which is his fourth book that came out in November of 2025. And he'll be donating all of his net proceeds to Homeboy Industries. Can we please welcome in Dr. Father Greg Boyle?
Thank you. So you want me to chat for a little bit and then we're going to open it up? Is that what we're doing?
Yep. Yes, we will.
Okay. So thank you for mentioning that Presidential Medal of Freedom, because you just said 2024. That was Joe Biden and not the current resident. So I'd like to say that. And second of all, when I got it, a homie texted me and he said, "I heard you got some presidential pardon or some shit." And I go, "Yes, that's what it was. Some presidential pardon." Anyway, I'm sitting in my office and there are throngs of people out there, ignoring the fact that I put a sign there that says on a Zoom. They're pounding on I'm trying to ignore them and hopefully they'll read the sign, the actual sign. So yeah, this was started in 1988 when I was pastor of the poorest parish in the city, Dolores Mission. It was nestled in the middle of two public housing projects, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village. At the time, it was the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. We had 8 gangs at war with each other in my parish, which is kind of unheard of when it comes to public housing. Usually there's one gang, but we had 8. LAPD said that my parish was the place of the highest concentration of gang activity in all of Los Angeles. So if there are 1,100 gangs with 120,000 gang members, and at least at the time was the gang capital of the world, my parish was the gang capital of Los Angeles. So we started a lot of things. We started a school because there were so many junior high, middle school age gang members who had gotten the boot from their home school. Nobody wanted them. So um, you know, I walked out to them. They would, in the middle of the day, they were wreaking havoc and violent and selling drugs and writing on the wall. So I walked out to them and I said, hey, I would kind of isolate them. I say, hey, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And to my surprise, every single one said yes. And then I couldn't find a school that would take them. So that kind of forced my hand. So across the street from the church is our elementary school, Dolores Mission Parochial School. First two floors were K to 8, but the entire third floor of this concrete block building was the convent where the nuns lived. So one evening I sat them all down in their living room. There was like 8 of them. And I said, hey, would you guys mind, moving out? And we could turn the convent into a school for gang members. And they said, sure. So that brought gang members in large numbers to the church property, which created kind of a disconnect. People in the parish would sidle up to me and say, aren't churches supposed to be hermetically sealed, good people in and bad people out? So it was a good challenge. And then they said if only we had jobs. So myself and the women, and the profile of the projects were mainly women with children. There weren't a lot of men. Myself and the women, we marched around the housing projects trying to find felony-friendly employers, and that wasn't so forthcoming. So we just had to start stuff because we couldn't find enough people to hire our folks. So we started a maintenance crew, a landscaping crew, a crew to build our child care center, all made up of rivals from the enemy gangs. Then on the last day of April 1992, with the acquittal of the 4 police officers who beat down Rodney King, every pocket of poverty in Los Angeles just ignited, except the poorest pocket, my parish. So the LA Times came. They wanted to know why that was. I said, well, I'm not sure entirely, but some of it I think had to do with the fact that we have 60 strategically hired rival gang members who had a reason to get up in the morning and a reason not to gangbang the night before and a reason not to torch their own community. So the article appeared, and then the following day I was summoned to the Beverly Hills office of a movie producer named Ray Stark, who happened to have $500 million. So I went to his office. First question he asked me was, how should I spend my money? And as I look back on it now, I can see that I woefully undershot my request. And just watch, thank you. They literally, they just barged right into my office. Anyway, so I said, well, there's an abandoned bakery across the street from the school. You could buy it, and it has ovens. They don't work, but you could fix them, and then we could call it Homeboy Bakery, put hairnets on rival gang members. Anyway, he loved the idea, and so we were off and running. A month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market. Once we had 2 enterprises, we changed our name from Jobs for a Future to Homeboy Industries. So now we've been around for 39 years, and 10,000 folks a year walk through our doors. And every single one who does comes barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace. And the only thing that can scale that wall is tenderness. And so they all come through the door with what psychologists would call a disorganized attachment. Mom was either frightened or frightening or both. And the only way, if you've never been soothed, then you kind of don't know what that kind of healing really means unless you can come into a place like this where you feel safe and seen and cherished. I mean, if it's true that the traumatized are likely to cause trauma, then it has to be equally true that the cherished will be able to find their way to the joy there is in cherishing themselves and others. So the soothing that kind of attaches people back to their roots and to wholeness is kind of what happens in the 18 months that people are here. It's foundational healing. Healing ends for all of us in the graveyard, but there's a kind of a, fundamental foundational healing that kind of has to kick in. We have a lot of lifers who walk through our doors, and they all say the same thing. We're used to being watched, but we're not used to being seen. And so, we hope to kind of affect that kind of healing. I suppose we were job centric in the early days, first 15 years. We had a T-shirt that said, "Nothing stops a bullet like a job." But then we realized that an educated gang member may or may not go back to prison, or an employed one may or may not. And then we discovered the truth that a healed gang member will not ever reoffend, period, ever. And once we knew that, we haven't looked back. We haven't altered our way of thinking in terms of that. So we're more deeply healing centered than ever before. So therapy, lots of groups, but it's mainly the culture where people feel cherished. Systems change when people change, and people change when they're cherished. And then after 18 months, we find them a job beyond here. And the world will throw at them what it will, but this time they won't be toppled. So, we do what we do and we help as we help, but we also want to stand for something. I mean, we're kind of the front porch of the house everyone wants to live in. And, now it's a message. What if we were to invest in people? And principally, what would happen if we decided to no longer punish wound, but seek to heal it? And so that's why we all imagine the day when policing is obsolete and prisons are empty. And you work towards that. None of that is naive or unrealistic. And so that's important. Our first venture was the Homeboy Bakery. Maybe I'll just tell that story and then open it up for you folks. But that was kind of the important thing was in the old days, the first 10 years of our existence coincided with basically the decade of death in Los Angeles, which was 88 to 98. 92 was the highest number of gang-related homicides recorded in Los Angeles history, 1,000. Since then, it's been cut in half and then cut in half again. But in those days, people just shook their fist at gang members. But there was no exit ramp off this violent freeway. So they were kind of stuck and they couldn't imagine. And then Homeboy Bakery kind of galvanized the imagination. You had rival enemy gang members baking bread. So it became kind of, people came to see it. And it was kind of famous. Prince Charles and his business advisors came to see Homeboy Bakery, and busloads of Japanese tourists. And it was just kind of, and a lot of TV news crews. And then it burned down in October of 99. And it was an electrical fire. And I remember running down the street at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I saw this homegirl named Lucero, and she hugged me and she was crying and she said, "Don't worry, G, we'll have a car wash tomorrow." I said, "Okay, I'm sure that'll put us right over the top, you know." And then I saw the senoras, you know, they were sobbing from the projects, a group of them, and promising to have a venta de comida to sell food the next morning. So we were able to, and I walked in, and the fire inspector was there, and he said, in those days, the first 10 years, we used to get hate mail, bomb threats, death threats. Never from gang members, because we were always a sign of hope for them, um, but from people who hated, who demonized gang members. So it was a short hop to demonize me for helping them. A lot of law enforcement, frankly, you know, I am a sheriff and I hate you. That's how the letters went. Signed anonymous sheriff, that kind of thing. So the fire inspector said, "Do you have any reason to believe why somebody might have set this fire?" And actually I thought, yeah, but I said, no, of course not. And then he said, "You didn't have any disgruntled ex-employees, did you?" And I said, "You know, I think we're okay there because all the disgruntled ones still work for me." And he didn't laugh. But then he said, "You know this area where the bakery's located?" I said, "I do." He said, "You know, it's known for hoodlums." And I said, "I think we're okay there because at Homeboy Industries, we only hire hoodlums, you know?" So anyway, it was natural causes. It was an old building. Well, the next morning we gathered, all the workers all gathered, but we couldn't contact this one kid, Danny, who texted me this morning. And I couldn't find him. So he shows up in his uniform and bien planchada and Homeboy Bakery and Danny emblazoned. And he walks in and his step is light until he gets into the parking lot and he sees all his coworkers, enemies picking through the rubble and the soggy mess that the firefighters pulled out. And he sees, you know, the smoke still wafting through the roof. And he realizes, and he just is paralyzed there. And he puts his face in his hands and he sees what's happened. And he realized, you know, this job was more than employment. It was his reason to get up in the morning. And the bond he knew with his coworkers was stronger than anything he had ever known in his family and certainly in his gang. So all we could do is surround him with love. And right behind this wall, I can smell baked bread. It's an amazing office to sit in. Is our bakery that operates 24/7. And then I'll finish this up. So homies, you know, it kind of put Homeboy on the map, you know, and so people in the old days when it was thriving over there, tour groups and such, and our foreman was a guy named Roman who was the biggest drug dealer I knew in the projects, and he finally said, "I'm ready to work at the bakery." So because he was a leader in his gang, he very quickly became the foreman. So he not only worked with his enemies, he had to supervise them, which is a great deal more difficult. And because we had daily tours and TV crews, he was in charge of that. He hated that part of the job. So one day we're waiting for this busload of farmers from Central California, people who owned farms, and they wanted to see the famous Homeboy Bakery. So he was standing next to her, we're waiting for the bus, and he's having a bad attitude day. And then the bus comes in, and I point where they can park, and the bus has a microphone up at the front where the tour guide stands, and he pretends he's the tour guide, and he says, "Welcome to Homeboy Bakery. Observe gang members in their natural habitat. Please keep your hands in the bus at all times. Do not attempt to feed the homies. They are not yet tame." And I said, "Cállate, cabrón." And so they come in, and I leave them with them. And I come back later, hours later, and I see him, and it triggers the memory of the tour. And I said, "Hey, how'd that tour go, by the way?" He goes, damn, gee, what's up with white people? And I said, I don't know what is up with us. And he says, they always be using the word great. I said, really, we do? I didn't know that. He goes, yeah, check this out. This busload of gavachos come into the bakery and they, see all the ovens and everything's clean. And they go, wow, this place is great. And then they see homies, enemies, rivals working side by side. You fellas are great. And then they tried the bread and they go, oh my gosh, this bread, it's great. And then he says, how come white people always be using the word great? I said, I don't know. I'd never heard this before till just now. And trust me, every opportunity I could find, I told him how great he was just to mess with him. All right. Cut to 6 months later, I'm at the bakery as it's closing at 11 o'clock at night. And he rushes my car, which he was never excited about anything. And I get out of the car and he says, you're not going to believe what happened yesterday. So he tells me that he picks up his 4-year-old daughter, Clarissa, at the babysitter's. And he drives home to his humble little apartment where, as a single father, he is paying honestly earned, clean, decent money for rent for the first time. And he unlocks the door, and little Clarissa runs down the hallway, and she plants herself in the living room, and she extends her arms, and she takes in this whole place, and she says, "This is great." And he said, I thought she was turning white on me. And then he gets down at eye level with Clarissa and he says, Mija, what's great? And little Clarissa clutches her chest and with great emotion, she says, my home. And as soon as he said that, instantly the two of us, our eyes well up with tears, and we just stared at each other for like an eternity until we watched tears rolling down both our faces. And I broke the silence and I said, you did this. You've never had a home in your life and now you have one. You did this. You used to be the biggest drug dealer in town and you stopped and you baked bread instead. You did this. You've never had a father in your life and now you are one. And I hate to have to tell you, but you're great. You remember these things, like when was the first time you retrieved that story to tell? And the first time I ever told it, and I hate to have to tell you, was 6 months later at his funeral. And he was packing his car, the trunk of his car, to go on a camping trip. And two guys came in with their faces covered. And they saw him and they must have thought he'll do. And they essentially executed him. But I told that story because the questions I got from the time of his death to the funeral from his friends and homies, it was a good question, but it was constant. They said, what's the point of doing good if that can happen to you? And I thought it was a good question. So in front of a packed church that night of his funeral, I told that story. And then I said, here was the point. Before he left us, he knew the truth of who he was. And he found his true self in loving. And then he inhabited that truth. He became that truth. And everyone knows that no bullet can pierce that. And no 4 prison walls can keep that out. And death can't touch it because it's great. So you stand at the margins because that's the only way they'll get erased. and you stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless. And you imagine a circle of compassion, and then you imagine nobody standing outside that circle. And you commit all over again every day to dismantle the barriers that exclude. And you stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop. And you stand with the so that the throwing people to brace yourselves, because the world will accuse you of wasting your time there. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, for in the which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. And so you appear, and the soul feels its worth. And you appear, and other voices will get heard. As we say in Congress, I yield the balance of my time to your questions.
Thank you so much. That was great, and you're in a place where you're supposed to be. That's the best thing about it. You're in the right place. People, they need you, and you need them, and that's wonderful. I read a couple of chapters of your book, and I want to ask this: can you speak a little bit about religion? Because you look at it from a completely different light than I've seen anybody look at religion.
Yeah, I don't really particularly talk about religion. I was at on a panel at UCLA, and they were talking about how people weaponize religion and all that kind of stuff. We don't really do religion here. We do spirit. We do, the God of love. We kind of find this a spacious footing and some expansive notion. But, we have Muslims, we have Buddhists, we have atheists, we have everybody. So we kind of don't go there in a way. But I think spirituality is a richer thing. There's the great mystic Mirabai Starr, who has great books, and she's a friend, and she translates mystics and is a mystic herself. But she says, once you know the God of love, you fire all the other gods. And I think that's true. And so that's kind of the task of maturity. The poet Rumi used to say, love is God's religion. I'll have what he's having. So it's kind of the centrality of love, how you want to, like around here, when we're trying to respond in a way that we can to, to the ICE presence and ICE raids. I was in my office with some homies, and one homie says, now, what do we do now? And before I could even utter a sentence, another homie said, love is always the next thing to do. And yes, it is. So there's the primacy of love as opposed to religion. So we don't proselytize. We don't try to convert anybody to anything except to love. And if people have a palpable experience of having been loved, it does something to them. And then they find the joy there is in loving themselves and others. That's why we say cherishing or tenderness, because otherwise love floats above your head or in your head or even in your heart. But cherishing moves love to your feet. And that's where it needs to be. It needs to be in your feet. And cherishing enables you to roll up your sleeves and get busy. So that's kind of the religion of Homeboy. Even though I'm a Jesuit priest, like Pope Francis, I'm just saying. And so anyway,
That's what I wanted to hear, because that's exactly what I was when I've read a couple of chapters, and I saw that what you're saying. It's completely different. It's a you're right. It's spiritual, and it's powerful. So thank you for that.
Sure.
Well, I can keep going, so I'll keep going. So here we go. The the tours and the visitors and all that. How did that affect the homies?
Well, we've been in this headquarters, which is quite huge. And oddly, uh, October 99, when the bakery burned down, it changed everything. From the first 10 years of death threats, bomb threats, and hate mail, on a dime, everything changed. The LA Times editorial board wrote an editorial basically saying Homeboy doesn't belong to Father Greg Boyle. It belongs to all of us here in Los Angeles. So in an instant, LA hoisted Homeboy Industries up on their shoulders. And it was why we were able to buy this property and build the huge headquarters with bakery, but cafe and all sorts of other things. And now we have an art academy across the street. And so it's just, it changed. It's change is possible. You kind of think, well, things won't ever change, like would the day ever come that people stop demonizing like gang members? And it did. It's kind of, there's been a resurgence given this current regime, of demonizing. And but by and large, the city kind of understood it. So suddenly it changed the notion, which was, are you tough on crime or are you soft? And so I suppose the first 10 years, law enforcement thought we were soft. But then after the fire, people went, oh no, the choice is not tough or soft. It's tough or smart. And then people went, oh, Homeboy's smart, which is why, gang related homicides got cut in half and then cut in half again. It's not, obviously not all Homeboy, but it's a notion that got out there finally, that what if we tried to invest in people and help people and heal wound rather than punish it? And that kind of took over, in the country. So when I first got here, I was in 25 different detention facilities on a rotating basis where I would do Catholic services. Now there are like 5. There are no more youth authority, and probation camps are down to, like 4, I guess. And there hardly anybody's in them, So, and that's just because people thought, well, I bet there's a better way to deal with this and address this than punishing people. So
Go ahead, Mike.
Thanks. And thanks, Father Greg, for this talk. It was great. uh, um, my name's Mike German. I was a FBI agent and actually assigned to the Los Angeles field office in 1988. So I was there for part of this journey, even though I was down in Orange County. So not related to anything there. But you mentioned the difficulties with law enforcement in the initiation, and particularly the skepticism they had, not just the local police, but that was at the time when the crime bill was going in and the federal government was much more involved and FBI was much more involved in gang enforcement. How did you navigate those relationships? Because I'm sure it wasn't just a matter of them being skeptical of your enterprise, but it would create a target-rich environment, right? Oh, if we know people are going there, then that's where we can find witnesses, victims, informants and possibly subjects. So how did you navigate those relationships?
Well, I was born and raised in Los Angeles, but I won all all these lotteries, the zip code lottery, the parent lottery, educational lottery. So when I was growing up, if the police arrived and you breathed a sigh of relief, they got the cat out of the tree. That's where I came from. And then I went to Dolores Mission. I've been there for, in that community anyway, for 42 years. And I was naive, initially when I started to know gang members, I would see um, gang members and their faces were rearranged. And I just presumed they got into a fight with some enemies. And I noticed the thing that they all shared together was a reluctance to tell me what happened. And until they started to tell me what happened. And every single one of many, many cases were taken to the factories behind the projects by law enforcement from LAPD. And they were just beaten to a pulp. And they weren't arrested, but it was for purposes of interrogation and intimidation. And they were absolutely humiliated, which is why they didn't want to tell me about it. And this is how naive I was in the early years. I went to the captain at Hollenbeck thinking he'd want to know, hey, your officers are doing this. I was so naive. Then it became kill the messenger. And it shook me up profoundly because I had a different view of law enforcement. Oddly, it really helped me with gang members because gang members knew that the cops hated me. So I wouldn't say we had a relationship until the bakery burned down and Bratton came as chief. Because Bratton wrote, when he first came, he wrote an op-ed piece in the LA Times. And it was basically, I know how to solve this gang issue. And there were so many things in the op-ed that were just alarming. So I wrote another op-ed, kind of counter to his, well, it was mainly his comments that he had made about there's a new sheriff in town and I know how to deal with this. So I was trying to say, hold the phone, Sparky, be a little more humble because there's no way you know what LA is. I don't care where you've been. So to his credit, he called me in, and that was the beginning of a relationship, and he spent an hour with me, just the two of us, which, was a lot. And we became friends. And then from that moment on, every Tuesday, he'd have his executive committee, whoever they are, staff, they would have breakfast at Homegirl Cafe and have their meeting here, which was kind of disconcerting to the homies initially. But that carried on even through Charlie Beck did it. And it stopped after Charlie. But so I don't know how the rank and file felt, but the chiefs they would call me and say, what should I do? And maybe it was keep your enemies closer, but I don't know. It was really goodwill and they wanted to know what was going on. But it became a kind of an odd thing because police officers have contact with gang members. That doesn't mean they have knowledge. And it doesn't mean they have access. And so, I had access and I had knowledge and I knew more gang members than any police officer. So I wasn't going to relinquish what I knew, in terms of what I think worked. Early on, I discovered that this was about a lethal absence of hope and that no kid is seeking anything when he joins a gang. Every single one is fleeing something. I've never met an exception in 42 years. So you want to get rid of the violence. You don't clamp down on it. You address what it's about. And if you can, offer hope to kids for whom hope is foreign, watch what happens to the violence. It disappears. In fact, it did. And it mattered. So, maybe some officers could see that, oh, wait, this is smart. The contrast from the early years, homies had the shirt that said Homeboy Industries. And when they left work, they took the shirt off and put on another shirt. And I saw them doing this every day. And then I called them in. I go, are you ashamed of Homeboy? You go, no, we're proud to work here. But cops will mess with us if they see a Homeboy shirt. They'll pull us over. And now cut to today, 39 years later, homies have endless stories of being pulled over by police and they see Homeboy Industries. And the cop will say, oh, you work at Homeboy? And he goes, yeah, okay. You can go. You have a tail light. You need to fix it. I mean, they'd let him go. And that's night and day. Who can explain that happens? But in the early days, I wouldn't say there was a lot of, relationships.
Mm-hmm. Amber? Looks like Amber might have frozen.
Well, we're waiting for you to get back. I have a question. Oh, you ready, Amber?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can. Okay, you're back. Good.
Yeah? Okay. So I was saying that it's first a pleasure and an honor to have you here, Father Greg. I've been getting services at Homeboy for over a year now, tattoo removal services.
Oh,
And
great.
unfortunately, I haven't met you in person. But I do understand the environment that you were discussing with the bakery being right next to your office, to just the love and genuine stability, if I can use the word. It's very comfortable navigating this area that you've helped establish and get a space for individuals that have been system impacted. And here, your work establishing in the 80s, what that looks like up until today, my mind instantly went to Chief Daryl Gates and Operation Hammer and all of these other elements that were attacking Black and Brown individuals. And I was wondering, through this process of healing and establishing love, how do you assist the individual in removing the labels that they may have started to believe, right? Because in the 90s, we had the super predator myths that were now attacking many Black and Brown people. So how do we dismantle the insecurity, for lack of a better word, of starting to believe what society thinks?
Yeah, I mean, I hope we've made progress on that, um, because you see a proliferation of, again, detention facilities being closed, or lifers. All the lifers here, not a single one of them ever thought they'd ever be free, and now they are. And so that comes from a place, where people say everybody's a whole lot more than the worst things they've ever done. The stigmatizing in terms of their own self-understanding, or they start to believe the crap that people say about them. That's I think that's less and less. But it's hard, because people come here, though they walk through the door, we don't cajole or recruit or round up people. I suspect there's not a gang member in LA County who doesn't know who we are and what we do. But you have to freely walk in the door. But people come in sometimes enraged, at what has been done to them, and maybe what they've done as well. And then they move to a kind of a sadness where they excavate their wounds and they kind of discover, wow, that was hard to navigate. My life was hard. And then they move to compassion and a sense of mercy. And that's powerful. And that's kind of an indicator that, people are getting well. And And that's how you know. So, but Homeboy is kind of like an AA meeting. Who's there? Somebody who's 20 years sober, somebody who's 20 minutes sober, and somebody who's drunk, but he's there. That's kind of what it feels like here. And, people are at different places. And 70% of the senior staff here came up through the program, our homies and homegirls who came in as an 18-month trainee. And so they kind of know where people are coming from. But here we're allergic to holding the bar up and asking homies to measure up. Instead, we hold the mirror up and we tell people the truth. You're exactly what God had in mind when God made you. And in spite of everything that they have endured and had to carry, their unshakable goodness is their essential truth. And the fact that we belong to each other, that's the other essential truth. So, but you're right, that's hard you have to kind of, rise above that. But you replace it with the truth. It's not pretense. It's not, let's pretend you're a good person. People know that this is their truth. And I think that's why this place works, is because I was at a LA Times Festival of Books on a panel with a rabbi and a columnist. And I was saying those are the two principles we embrace. Everybody's unshakably good, and we all belong to each other. No exceptions in either case. And then I said, do I think every complex social dilemma that we need to address would disappear if we embrace those two things? And then I said, yes, I do. And the whole auditorium, packed auditorium, just burst into laughter. And it startled me, I'll admit. And when the laughter subsided, I said, yes, I do. And yes, I do. I think, it's the only thing that gets us to roll up our sleeves is if you believe everybody is unshakably good, no exceptions, and that we belong to each other, no exceptions. Only then can you really work to solve the unhoused issue or gang violence or mental health or disaffected youth, whatever it is, can be solved if you begin there.
And has anybody been able to replicate your project in other cities?
Yeah, that's a good
Something
question.
similar?
Yeah, I never remember to mention this, but thank you for prompting that. Because so in 2008, when we moved in here, we started to get these tours. And the first tour, I remember that where this happened was a group of stakeholders from Wichita. And, chief of police and city council and mayor, that kind of thing. And they got the tour and then they met with me and they said, basically, could we airlift this into Wichita? And so I gathered my staff together because we'd never been approached with that request. And so I said, hey, do we want to do that? Do we want to become the McDonald's of gang intervention programs? Over 6 billion gang members served. So we said, no, we'll offer technical assistance. We'll help you start something in Wichita. Because gang members in Wichita would say correctly, well, what does Homeboy Industries know about Wichita? And they'd be right. So we kind of give them the building blocks, and here's what you could do. And they started a restaurant called the Center Cafe, made up of rival enemy gang members who ran this restaurant. And then they opened a second one. And then they added things like we have, case management and navigators and therapy and maybe tattoo removal. So now we have a group called the Global Homeboy Network. And there are 300 programs in the United States modeled on Homeboy, 50 outside the country. And we gather every, the last 3 days normally of July, and people come, our partners. So Rise Up Industries in San Diego, or Braveheart Industries in Glasgow, Scotland, they'll come, and it's first come, first serve, because it fills up immediately. Like 350 is all we can handle. And at the California Endowment down the block. And, we share best practices, and we have keynotes and breakout sessions and workshops, and different burgeoning programs will present where they are. And everybody, I've never been at any, this is our 14th year of it, I think. And I've never been at anything quite like it, where everybody is just so on the same page. I've never seen that before. And then what's changed is, in the early days, it was all, as you would say, justice impacted gang members, returning citizens. Now, it includes programs dealing with the unhoused or mental health, or Sydney has a program for disaffected youth. And there's one in Nigeria, and they come almost every summer. So, so people are finding that, no matter what the complex social dilemma is that we need to address, this seems to do it. So
Thank you.
That's
Amber?
beautiful, Father Greg. Thank you for sharing your stories, your journey, your experience. We had a couple of people in the chat that wanted to quickly let you know something and also ask a question.
Sure.
Questions, praise. Your book, Tattoos on the Heart, is in constant rotation in our little library. We're routinely having to restock it. In Tattoos of the Heart, you talked about the parishioner who returned years after you had transformed the parish into a collection of spiritual and social services. I believe the visitor said something like, "Man, this used to be a church," to which you replied, "Some say that now it is a church." I've tried to live by those words, turning my heart and my work into that kind of church. And we have Anna that asks, Father Greg, were you ever or were you not scared to talk to people in gang at first?
I initially, I remember the first few days, I would just sit at my desk like the Maytag repairman, waiting for somebody to come by, and nobody did. So, and then I thought, well, I'm going to walk. So I walked into the projects. At the very first day, I just turned the corner around the church, and a black and white LAPD car pulled over. And because I'm a white man walking in the projects, obviously I'm there for only one reason, and that is to get me some crack. And so he pulls over and he says, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well," I pointed at the church. I said, "I'm the new pastor and I'm walking in my parish." And I'll never forget this. He said, "I don't recommend it." Like, I'm not going to walk in my parish. So that just redoubled my commitment. So, initially there was also, homies, you know, they would say, I'd walk in the neighborhood. Initially, they go, "Good afternoon, officer." Then they thought I was a police officer. And then slowly but surely, it changed, And then in those days, I would go to all these detention facilities and I'd visit people who I knew were from the projects, or hospitals. I would visit 3 hospitals a day, local hospitals, because Mike knows this, that in those days, the weapons were not what they are now. So you'd have buckshot and 22s, and you had wounded. Now you were more likely to, have deaths. But in those days, you actually had people sent to the hospital and recovered. So I'd visit them in the hospital. So gang members would come home from jail or the hospital, and suddenly word spread that I visited them, and they'd never forget that as long as they live. And so then little by little, I had a school, and then I had jobs, and so I had, kind of juice, but not initially. It took a while, but I don't think I was ever scared. I don't know why that is. I've been in lots of shootouts, but I never took them personally. I would just be talking to members of one of the 8 gangs, and somebody would creep in and open fire. And every single time, and it's happened more times than I can recall, gang members always had the same reaction. It was as if they were Secret Service agents. They would tackle me to the floor, and they would encompass me with their bodies to make sure that no bullet hit me every single time. And it was just an instinct, very sacrificial and loving, and I'll never forget it. But I never felt, I've never been scared except trying to meet payroll every 2 weeks. That's the only thing that's terrified me in my lifetime. But everything else, you have to have a light grasp on life, on death, and all those things.
We've come to the end of the hour, but I did have one question, and you just got through touching on it. Who was the business mind behind all this?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't have a business mind. 39 years later, we're a $50 million annual operation. But I ran the place for 25 years. And then it was like, I don't know shit about business. So I got a guy who was volunteering, and then I asked him, why don't you be the CEO? So he was CEO for 13 years. And now we have 2, and then he retired for the second time. And then we have 2 co-CEOs, a man and a woman, both who had been here for a long time. So we didn't want to do a headhunter or go try to find somebody, because the hardest part about this place is understanding the culture. And they do, because they've been here a long time. You can learn all the other stuff. So I'm founder, but I just raise money and I give talks. And when I'm here, I'm at this desk and see the homies, which kind of invigorates me. But, so part of the thing that you try to as a mission, and beyond the businesses or the enterprises is, if people can believe the truth about themselves, as Amber was addressing, if they can believe that, like the poet says, when you totally surrender to that beauty, and then we all become a mighty kindness, he says. I think it's Rumi, the poet, the Persian poet. Once you totally surrender to that beauty, we shall be a mighty kindness. And so, and kindness is the only strength there is, and only the souls that ventilate the world with tenderness has any chance of changing the world. And George Saunders, the great fiction writer, says the only non-delusional response to everything is kindness. So that's what we dedicate ourselves to. It's not easy, because all of us get taken to that place. But, the more you can breathe in the spirit that delights in your being, you will be able to breathe that spirit out into the world in loving kindness.
Thank you.
So anyway, what a privilege to be with all of you.
And
Please
thank you so much for being here.
Sure.
Okay, we'll get you back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Father Greg. Thank you, guys.
That was
Bye.
great. That was great. Thank you, Amber.
No problem. Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.
Conversations on Race and Policing has been supported by funding from the California State University San Bernardino College of Social and Behavioral Sciences, Faux Library, and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Finn Lee is our technical consultant. Pamela Crossan provides administrative support, and Alan Yavor provides communication support. There's more information in the show notes, and please join us online at csusb.edu/CORP for upcoming programming and to find our catalog of over 100 past events with guests like Robin D.G. Kelly, Jamal Bowman, Dorothy Roberts, and many more.